Now we turn to a report on Donald Trump's comments being a flashpoint on this MLK Day. They are bigger than Donald Trump. There is a larger transformation, and it's post-Bush, anti-Obama backlash with race at the center. A transformation where we think Donald Trump isn't just doing all of this and riling everybody up. He is also building on things. He is a symptom. Consider that in 2006, give credit where it's due. It was a Republican president at the time, George W. Bush, who signed the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, a sign the parties could still come together on civil rights. But by the Barack Obama era, Republicans in Congress were now fighting that same bill when it needed an adjustment after a Supreme Court ruling. It was also Bush who held that primetime address to the nation that, among other things, called for, yes, remember it, a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. Consider that on MLK Day, presidents in both parties have traditionally taken action to mark it. President Reagan, who did initially oppose the creation of this holiday, important to remember, but he did sign it into law under pressure, and the first federal MLK Day was in 1986.
And on this day, the United States of America celebrates, for the very first time, a federal holiday honoring Dr. King today, January the 20th, 1986.
And more incremental credit where it might be due. Then Vice President George H.W. Bush was standing at the Ebenezer Baptist Church with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, another way to mark today. We've seen president after president stand in front of the nation and at least make an effort to reflect in different ways on Dr. King's legacy. They've addressed the role of King's message and how it plays around the world. President Obama went beyond delivering a speech and did service, words into action. You can see it right there. Compare all of that in all those different ways to what we see today, Donald Trump's first MLK Day. He tweeted out a link of his weekly radio address about the legacy, and then he went golfing. So perhaps we'll reflect on Dr. King's words, not our own. It may well be that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition is not the glaring noisiness of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. There's been a lot of silence to consider. Neera Tanden, a senior advisor to President Obama, as well as Hillary Clinton. Paul Butler, a law professor at Georgetown Law and the author of Chokehold: Policing Black Men, nominated for an NAACP Image Award. And Professor James Peterson, back with me. Neera, I begin with you. Your thoughts on the collage I just showed, which doesn't suggest everyone did the same things or had the same policies, but did reflect a lot of presidents in both parties, even Reagan under pressure, ultimately found a way to try to mark this holiday when it existed. It doesn't appear that's happening much today.
No, I mean, obviously it's extraordinary that you have a president who plays golf on Martin Luther King Day instead of doing really anything, any kind of act or statement other than a tweet. But obviously I don't think we can separate the president's actions today and his actions last week and his basically racist statements he made, and you know, just the entire administration, which started with a Muslim ban and then went through to Charlottesville and attacking NFL players through obviously last week. And so I think the reality is that there has been a consensus. Obviously the parties have not been equal, but there's been some consensus that we cannot just openly flame racial hostilities in our country. There have obviously been dog whistles, et cetera, but that has been broken by a president who feels perfectly comfortable basically pitting American against American.
Yeah, I mean, Professor Peterson, I think Neera puts it very well and very bluntly, because you have the use of what was out of bounds, the straight-up epithets, straight-up attacks, straight-up vulgarity, straight-up demeaning. Here was Ronald Reagan talking about why that kind of language should be avoided.
If someone, even a friend, uses an ugly word referring to another's race or religion, let's make it clear we won't put up with it. Racial, ethnic, or religious slurs are vulgar, mean-spirited, and there's no place for them in a democratic and free America.
James?
Stunning that we would use Ronald Reagan here to put into bold relief the racism of Donald Trump, given former President Reagan's track record in terms of how he campaigned and the different sort of tactics he used, the Southern strategy, things of that nature. Incredible that he can sort of put into bold relief the racism of this president. But I think it's time for us to conclude that in addition to Donald Trump as a sort of administrative leader undermining and degrading the various institutions of the presidency, undermining and degrading the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, the EPA, all these different ways in which they've sort of subverted and reversed progressive policies in these institutions, he is now also, I think, responsible for actually downgrading the office of the presidency itself. The montage that you showed in the beginning, Ari, puts that into bold relief. It reveals for us the ways in which right now on MLK Day we can look at this presidency and understand very specifically how Donald Trump has degraded the office of the presidency of the United States of America.
Whoa, Ari, I usually agree with my friends James and Nira, but I think you guys are giving way too much credit to ordinary Republicans. Donald Trump is a difference in degree, but not a difference in kind. Again, President Reagan, he didn't say the N-word, but he talked about welfare queens and big strapping bucks. So everybody knew what he meant. The reason that Republicans from Trump on down make all these race-based appeals is because it works for a majority of white people. No president has gotten, no Democratic president has gotten the majority of the white vote since Lyndon Baines Johnson back in the 1960s. So we can, you know, bemoan all of these race-based appeals, but at the end of the day, for a good 50% of white folks, that's a winning strategy.
Nira?
So I guess I would just say that I totally take the point that Reagan's use of the term welfare queen and other language was really coded. But I would say, and terrible and demeaning. But I think there is actually a difference between feeling that there's a need to use code words and not using any code words at all. I mean, I do think the fact that Donald Trump is open in his language, that he basically, you know, he called people from these countries asshole and described people from those countries in these terms, that has an incredible impact on people from those countries and for people of color generally. And so I am not by any stretch of the imagination saying Republicans don't own this. Obviously they do. And the fact that Republican after Republican took to the airwaves yesterday to basically make excuse or perhaps lie on behalf of the president is a sign of how like the calamity that's happened to the Republican Party.
Yeah, but Paul Ryan is one of those people who will come out against Donald Trump's most extreme and racist points of views. But at the same time, he's up there cheerleading when the most conservative Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch is appointed way to the right, even of Justice Scalia. He's cheerleading this plunder, this theft disguised as a tax bill, this wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. So again, I don't know if it makes that much of a difference.
Let me push you on that and say, certainly there's a big difference between a federal appeals court judge who'd been previously supported by people in both parties who rules in a certain way, or a tax bill that has a certain ideology, and I think what Nir is getting at, which is the rank, direct, blaring racism or name-calling that is different than a policy debate.
Well, again, if you're doing what Paul Ryan is doing, which is try to take health care away from poor people who will die without that kind of assistance, again, I don't know how different that is from Trump calling somebody a name. What the majority of Republicans are doing, frankly, is destroying the lives. They're contributing to this era where black lives don't matter.
Nira helped write Obamacare. Let me give her a final rebuttal.
Well, let me just, obviously, I think what they did on the Affordable Care Act or trying to gut people's health care is abhorrent. I do think the idea that the president says words like this are not just deeply hurting to you and me, but, you know, Haitian American children have to hear those words and think about whether they belong in a country like that. I think that is a special harm that the president is doing. And it's a different than a policy debate, although obviously terrible.
Yeah, let me fit
all
in
of the above.